The reason why chivalrous individuals are chivalrous is due to their poor origins. They cannot work hard to produce, nor can they be indifferent in content. They cannot avoid breaking the law to seek food. Lu Simian, History of the Northern and Southern Dynasties of the Two Jin Dynasties, The Encounter of Fate. Or is it human-made? Youth's ambition. Or is it just for beauty? If the endpoint of the journey has been predetermined, then what should be the plan? Unreal ideals, like snowflakes, cannot be grasped, but fate truly influences life. If this is the choice of the story, then how should we choose? When I decided to pick up that sword, I had already made a decision. This is a semi-fictional world that tells the story of a group of people from distant times who embark on a series of adventures and experiences due to chance encounters. Keywords of the novel. Heroic Illusion without pop-ups. Download the complete set of Heroic Illusion TXT, and read the latest chapters of Heroic Illusion. Chapter 1. Drifting. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 1. Drifting. 1. The Xianjiangpo Inn, illuminated by the sunset, is the only inn within a few dozen miles of Yangcheng. So despite the constant wars, there is still some anger here to some extent, but under the setting sun, these few hues add a bit of despair. There are not many people inside the stack now, and the noise is far less than before, to the extent that the sound of insects and beasts outside is incredibly clear, making this mountain forest and wild shop even more peaceful and tranquil. Buddy Abian, as usual, sat in the stable outside the stack, feeding the horses and eating grass while dozing off, occasionally tirelessly driving away the flies attracted by the smell of horse manure. "Excuse me, brother. Is there anyone here?" A young man slowly stepped forward and bowed. Abian was awakened by the young man's words, and he didn't notice any sound except for flies and horses chirping. He immediately straightened his vision and carefully examined the young man in front of him. From his clothing, he looked just an ordinary family, ordinary coarse linen clothes. Under the red slanting sun, only the outline remained, making it difficult to distinguish, except for a head of long hair. However, he had a gourd tied around his waist and a sword hanging diagonally on the other side of his waist. As he walked, the end of the scabbard was level with his knee. Upon seeing this, Abian thought that the military master had arrived and was frightened, immediately nodding and bowing, forcing a smile to greet him. "Is it a guest?" "He, this is Xianjiangpo Inn. The smaller one is the staff member of the inn, Bien. Do you want to stay or eat?" Bien said, bowing slightly and constantly rubbing his palms to ease his inner panic. "Stay overnight and bring some food along." The young man breathed a sigh of relief before answering in a calm tone that seemed to be muttering to himself in the air. After finishing speaking, Bien followed the young man into the inn and saw that the young man was carrying a bundle and a long item in a cloth bag across his back. This item occasionally made a sound when it collided with the gourd on his waist, resembling a wooden object. "Shopkeeper. Business is coming." Bien shouted to the person who was leaning towards the door. The young man cautiously looked around after entering the door. "I saw all around me were earthen walls, a redwood staircase leading to the upper level, and a room at the entrance of the corridor facing the position of the shopkeeper. Four dilapidated wooden tables were placed in front of them, and the one facing the door had a broken corner, all of which had traces of being washed away by years. The table next to the inner wall is where two people are drinking and eating meat, and there is also a room next to them. Little brother, come over here." The shopkeeper waved to the young man. "Are you staying in a restaurant or eating?" The young man replied, "Check in and bring some food along." "Okay. Well, guest, please write your name here first, I'll arrange it now." The shopkeeper responded to the familiar guests, smiling while also playing with his 8-character beard. The young man occasionally glanced sideways at the two people sitting against the wall, which made him even more anxious than the former. "Do you think these silver coins are enough?" The young man took out a bag of money from his bag. "Oh my! This money is enough to stay in the best guest room of the small shop for a month. The shopkeeper, who appeared to be in the old world, was startled by so much money and thought to himself, isn't this the noble young master of the local gentry? The young man seemed to be influenced by the reaction made by the shopkeeper, and his already panicked expression became even more at a loss. He shyly looked into his wallet and said, I only stayed one night and will leave tomorrow morning. The shopkeeper saw that this young man was probably going on a long journey for the first time, so he responded, young brother, when you first enter the martial arts world, you need to have a long mind. There are wars and murders outside every day, and there are many black shops that kill people. Don't worry about staying here tonight. Your room is on the second floor. Are you not a black shop here? The young man quickly changed his tone, and just now he was looking sideways at the eyes of the two of them towards the shopkeeper's eyes, like a falcon staring at its prey for half a moment. The shopkeeper didn't expect the inexperienced young man to ask back, but what really made the shopkeeper feel uneasy was the pair of eyes. Sir, you can't say this nonsense. Look at my guests listening there, they have knives on their bodies. I have no strength to fight with them. How can I fight with them? After speaking, he gently wiped away the sweat from his temples and muttered, complaining that young people nowadays speak irresponsibly. All right, hurry up and bring some food over. The young man noticed that he was speaking rudely and resolved the unintentional incident with a smile, then walked up the stairs next to the shopkeeper. After the young man left, the shopkeeper was surprised to think. Why did this person have such fierce and terrifying eyes, despite having a fair and handsome face? After the young man finished explaining, he wanted to walk to the room and happened to meet those two people who were drinking and eating meat on the way. I don't know if it's out of fear or hiding from the public, but the young man lowered his head and quickened his pace, just wanting to hurry up and pass the two drinkers. Unexpectedly, those two people actually started observing the young man as soon as he entered the inn. Hey! Little brother! Don't leave in a hurry, come over and say a few words. The young man's plan failed, and his face suddenly showed a hint of fear. He slowly looked up at the direction of the slightly strange tone of the voice, only to see that the other person was a yellow-bearded and yellow-haired alien. The young man's heart was even more anxious now, and his palms and spine were gradually eroded by sweat. One of them stood up and let out a seat, just as he showed the knife placed on the table to the young man, as if telling him either come over, or try this knife. The young man trembled, his right hand never leaving the hilt pinned to his waist, as if welcoming the upcoming fierce battle. The young man sat down, and another chubby and sturdy foreigner poured a glass of wine to signal the young man to drink. The young man looked at the glass without moving. Drink it, this wine is the shopkeeper's aged good wine, very mellow. The short and strong man finished speaking and drank a glass himself, repeatedly exclaiming, good wine. The young man pondered and said, let's talk about something. His tone was firm and calm, which surprised the other two present. Little brother, looking at your beautiful appearance and fair skin with tender flesh, I thought you were a girl from a distance, but I didn't expect your words to sound like a straightforward man. Another tall and thin man took his knife out of its scabbard to play with it, as if teasing or threatening the young man. Hurry up and ask, if you continue to be disrespectful to me in your words, you may inevitably have to draw your sword towards me. The young man's tone was as cold as ice. This little furry child, how could he fight us brothers with thin hands and feet? The short and strong man was already drunk, but his words may not be true. All right, I have something to say directly, the tall and thin man said. We are deserters, and we were originally a member of the Urju family. I heard that the deserters outside are very powerful now, so I wanted to ask if you met any army on your way here. He kept his eyes fixed on the knife in his hand as he spoke, although his tone was not aggressive, the young man couldn't help but be intimidated by this murderous aura. I haven't encountered any army. I heard that the Urju tribe has been exterminated, and there are also rumors that Zhu Zhao committed suicide by hanging a beam in a dilapidated temple on a barren mountain. General Zhu Zhao committed suicide. We Xianbei warriors never commit suicide, I can't believe it. The tall and thin man put down his knife and clenched his fist with the other hand, fiercely hitting the table in anger. The young man curled his lips and sneered, "You are just deserters." The short and chubby man said discontentedly, "We are not soldiers. If it weren't for the food and pay, we should still be staying in the north herding sheep. Why do we have to sacrifice our lives for Ners Huzio?" He was right. Since losing the battle with Gao Huan in the north, Zhu Zhao's strength has run out, the tall and thin man continued. "Excuse me for now, goodbye." The young man turned around and left, breathed a sigh of relief, then walked towards his own room. In no time, Bian brought the food to the boy's room, while the boy was checking his luggage. Bian lightly tapped on the door to signal that the meal was here, then leaned over to the young man and whispered, "My guest, please don't provoke those two Xianbei people. Their swords are very powerful, even though I and the shopkeeper hate them deeply." "What's wrong with them?" "They're eating free food. They said they were protecting our homes, but in reality, they almost emptied our inn's granary." "Why not report to the government?" the young man said as he tied up his bundle and placed it by the bedside. "This is a chaotic military situation. No one in the government can handle the affairs of this wilderness." Bian looked helpless. "I see, you go down first." After Bian left the room, he quickly returned to the stable to continue his work. End of this chapter. Chapter 2. Drifting. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 2. Drifting. 2. Late at night, the bright moon hangs high. The sky, which was supposed to be so quiet with only the sound of insects chirping and leaves moving, was shattered by the sound of a flute. The boy sat by the window, his fingers caressing the hole of the flute. It turned out that the long wooden object was just a flute. The sound of the flute is silent, slow and long, evoking deep contemplation. Overlapping and vibrato are intertwined in an unknown piece of music, with sliding notes interspersed in between, sometimes abruptly stopping and sometimes abruptly turning, like a person pouring out their heart to someone, unable to help but cry when they say something sad. Bian was awakened by the sound of the flute, and he was afraid of waking up the two Xianbei people again. He had no choice but to drag his body, which had not fully awakened, to stop the sound. "Sir, open the door." Bian lowered his voice as much as he could, and after speaking, Xiao Yin stopped. Bian stared intently at the moment and the wooden door was closed and opened. With a faint candlelight, he could only see a sword eyebrow and a starry figure. The long-haired beauty with a face as transparent as white jade was about to speak and asked, "What's up?" Bian was stunned for a while before realizing that he didn't mistake anyone. He recognized this cold and stern voice. After entering the door and seeing the long sword hanging by the bedside, Bian's fear suddenly arose in his heart, and he became timid when speaking. "Well, sir, you see everyone is resting now. If the sound of the flute startles those two Xianbei people, it will be troublesome." After that, the young man nodded and gestured not to play anymore. At this moment, a voice happened to come out of the nearby room. "The sound of the flute is very moving, why stop it?" The young man and Bian looked towards the direction of the door for half a moment, and saw a man standing about 8 feet tall, with a majestic posture, dressed in silk brocade clothes, and slightly white temples. He smiled and said, "Oh. So it was this young master playing the flute." Bian tiptoed forward and said, "Sir, it's already late at night. If those two Xianbei adults don't have the same pitch as the villains, it would be terrible if this voice wakes them up." The man calmly took out a string of copper-bought coins from his sleeve pocket and said, "Here you go to the city to eat and drink with your two adults when you have nothing to do in your spare time. You go down first and report my name if something happens." Bian saw the money, and although he didn't want to offend the two Xianbei warriors in his heart, he still accepted the money and responded. The young man, seeing that the man was generous in his actions and his words were neither humble nor overbearing, exuding a heroic demeanor, dared not underestimate him. He gestured for the man to take his seat and brewed a pot of tea, saying, "Sir, please." The man took it with his right hand and gently sucked on it, saying, I can't believe that this mountain and wilderness shop also has good tea to taste. My surname is Zhao, and the list is in parentheses. I don't know if you. The younger generation's surname is Bai and their name is Feng. The young man thought to himself that the person who reported their name must have come for a purpose, so he decided to talk along the way. Junior. Humph. The man sneered and said, "Don't worry, my temples are graying. In fact, I'm still young next year, only 19. Bai Feng felt a little puzzled, but quickly regained his composure as before. Oh. That's really impolite. Brother Zhao, I happen to be 19 years old. I just don't know what your excellency is looking for me for. Okay, Brother Bai is indeed straightforward. I, Zhao Qua, have made you a friend. Bai Feng couldn't help but think to herself, is this person a true hero or a careless and wealthy young man? Zhao Qua continued, let me make a long story short. Recently, the incident between your excellency and the group of Xianbei in the inn happened, and I have a panoramic view. Although Brother Bai Feng is young, he has no fear at all, which is truly admirable. I have a single shadow below, hoping to find someone capable to help me succeed. It is because Brother Bai has the courage to know people and seems to have some knowledge of martial arts, that we are here to meet. Zhao Qua's speech is indeed not like that of an ordinary son of a wealthy gentry. Can we further understand him? Bai Feng thought to herself and immediately asked, I don't know what happened to Brother Zhao. Bai Feng also took a sip of light tea, moving slowly and freely, but her eyes never forgot to move and observe Zhao Qua's body. To be honest, my ancestors have been in business for generations, and in the north, they were a powerful town. This is even more true in my father's generation. A few months ago, my father and I went to Yangqing to do business with my younger sister. When we returned, we were robbed by bandits, and both my father and sister were captured. With the protection of a martial arts master, we managed to escape from this place. The martial arts master was later seriously injured and died. Therefore, I was left here alone for several months, waiting for the help of the martial arts master. Bai Feng stood up and picked up the flute bag to carefully observe, as if checking for any leaks. Then she picked up a handkerchief and carefully wiped the flute. After a moment of silence, she said, I see that those two Xianbei warriors have extraordinary martial arts skills, even better than me. Why don't you go find those two people to help? Bai Feng knew in her heart that from the conversation between Zhao Qua and the shopkeeper just now, it was not difficult to see that Zhao Qua had a strong hostility towards the Xianbei warriors. And speaking these words is precisely due to being wary of the stranger in front of me. Brother Bai Feng, when I see the Xianbei people now, I think of my kidnapped father and lovely little sister. That group of thieves are mostly yellow-haired and yellow-bearded people from other ethnic groups, who have similar appearances to the Xianbei people in the inn. Zhao Qua's expression gradually became grim, I dare not imagine what kind of torture they are suffering from. Bai Feng pursed her lips and sneered, Brother Zhao, even if you show your teeth like this, you won't be able to save them. Why don't you save some effort and discuss countermeasures? In short, if I were the only one, going to Longtan Tiger Cave would definitely result in a near death. After hearing this, Zhao Qua sighed and his face, twisted with anger, also relaxed. Looking at the full moon outside the window, my face couldn't help but feel a bit sad. Thinking of the happy time with my father and little sister in the past, thinking of my current helplessness. My eyes became moist. Bai Feng also admires the moon together. As he raised his cup to drink tea, Yu Guang inadvertently caught a glimpse of Zhao Qua's predicament. The two remained silent for a long time under the bright moonlight, but failed to come up with a better plan. In a moment, Zhao Kuo pretended to yawn and wiped away the tears in front of him, pretending to be dull. He said, "Brother Bai, if you don't say anything about me, it's quite boring. Why don't you continue playing the music you just played?" Bai Feng nodded in response. The gentle breeze blows, cicadas chirp and birds mix, and the stars and moon shine together. There is a slightly chilly floral fragrance lingering in the wind, which not only makes people feel incredibly comfortable, but also has the ability to evoke memories of the past. Who wouldn't be in love with this scene? Previously, Bai Feng stroked the flute and played it, which must have touched the scenery with emotion. After finishing the song, the two of them drank tea by candlelight. Zhao Shixian broke his silence and said, "Brother Bai knows both music and martial arts. Your master is definitely not an ordinary person." Bai Feng paused for a moment when she heard the word master, and the porcelain cup that was ready to serve tea was also hanging under her lips. She replied, "My master just passed away a few days ago." Zhao Kuo was aware of the loss of etiquette and was about to stagger the topic. Bai Feng saw him panic and asked in a teasing tone, "What kind of business is Zhao's family doing? There are wars everywhere now, and supplies are scarce in various places. Is it possible that Zhao's family is doing a rare and valuable business?" After hearing this, Zhao Kuo laughed heartily and said, "Brother Bai is truly extraordinary. You can tell at a glance the way our family's business is going. You hoard the goods from the north and transport them to the south where there are no such goods. Although this goes against chivalry, the road is full of bandits, strange insects, and beasts. We have also gambled our lives to do business. This time we lost the bet, we lost completely. This is the first time I have followed us on a long journey, how could I encounter a barbaric bandit?" End of this chapter. Chapter 3. Drifting. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 3. Drifting. 3. Just as Zhao Kuo was regretful, a group of exhausted Han soldiers were excited to find a brightly lit house. A small but muscular person ran ahead, and when it was confirmed that the area was brightly lit, he immediately rushed back. A few miles away in the forest, a group of Han soldiers are resting. Most of the 30 or so soldiers were injured, and 3 or 4 of them had limbs and could only lie down in makeshift camps. The so-called tent is just a simple bed made of dry branches and leaves, with branches extending from the forest as the roof, surrounded by a fire in the middle, and the coughing sound and the gentle breeze interweaving in the night sky. Soldiers dare not speak loudly, and most of them are discussing issues such as what to do when the food is finished and how to deal with injured brothers. Someone begged for some wine to moisten their stomach from the sky, someone is catching small insects to satisfy their hunger. They mostly sat on the ground around the campfire, with only a few people watching outside. A soldier with a tall and burly figure, with curly beards on his lips and cheeks, stood up and shook the fallen leaves and dust on his body. He picked up the machete on his right side and vigorously swung it towards the bamboo grove on his left. With a shush sound, the green bamboo fell. Everyone looked at the sound, and the soldier's eyes were resolute and his tone was resolute. He said, "We managed to escape from the hands of the Hu people and dodged the pursuit. We must not fall here. Xiao Jiu, who went to explore the way, will soon come back." A tall and thin soldier with a pointed face and a wide forehead stood up and responded, "Big brother is right. You all sacrificed your lives to escape, not just for gold, silver, wealth, luxury, and food, and not to be manipulated by those barbarians anymore. Now we haven't even seen a penny, and we must not let our previous achievements be abandoned." Xiaojiu, who was exploring the way, did not rest on his way back, so he quickly returned to the camp. As he was about to reach there, the rustling sound he made as he quickly moved and stepped on the withered leaves on the ground first alarmed the soldiers, and then his thick and disproportionate voice reached everyone's ears. "Big brother! Big brother! There is indeed a family ahead, and it is also an inn." Xiao Jiu said with a long sigh of relief, "Everyone, pack up and set off immediately. The originally low morale of the crowd seems to have recovered a lot. Immediately after, Xiao Jiuyi led everyone towards Baifeng. With a tired body and driven by thirst and hunger, the 30s arrived at the entrance of the Yangpa Inn in just half a stick of incense. Bian just took over the gatekeeper's job and was complaining in his heart. I didn't sleep well tonight and still have to watch the door. It's impossible for anyone to come. Then he collapsed into his usual position as the shopkeeper, dozing off. Da-da-da-da. Suddenly, there was a chaotic sound of footsteps outside the door, which Bian did not notice. Instead, the wealthy young master Zhao Qua had a keen sense of hearing. Upon hearing the sound, he immediately opened the paper window at the end of the bed and saw the soldiers. Later, feeling doubtful, he went to the compartment to discuss with Baifeng. Zhao Qua walked out of his room, took 2 big steps, and quickly and silently arrived at the door of Baifeng's room. He gently knocked on the door 3 times, dong, dong. Unexpectedly, by the 3rd time, Baifeng had already opened the door, which startled Zhao Qua, who was unprepared. As soon as Zhao Qua entered the door, he tiptoed to the window and whispered to Baifeng, I never thought that Baifeng, like me, couldn't sleep at night, or was he awakened by the noise outside? Baifeng nodded lightly, gesturing to speak more in detail later. The top priority is to first understand what these dozens of people want. Their gaze followed the figures in the darkness into the inn, only to see some people staying in place outside the inn to rest, seeming to have suffered varying degrees of injuries, and their movements were very difficult. Immediately, the 2 of them leaned over to the door, covering a door to eavesdrop on the situation outside. The soldiers outside the inn walked into the inn, led by Xiaojiu. Xiaojiu lightly knocked on the wooden door and said, Is anyone there? Then he looked around and saw a few scattered candles emitting dim light, making it difficult for the 2 of them to distinguish who was facing each other. The broken tables and chairs were arranged haphazardly, covered in a thick layer of ash, as if guests were not welcome. Xiaojiu sighed inwardly and comforted himself, saying, It's already good to have a place to rest when running for his life. Then, he heard the sound of someone snoring and followed it, seeing Bian who was already asleep. Xiaojiu immediately waved to signal everyone to walk inside, while also wanting to awaken the inn staff who were already in their dreams. I patted lightly with my hand but didn't wake up, the 2nd time, still not awake, the 3rd time, Xiaojiu pushed hard and almost pushed Bian to the ground. Fortunately, Bian helped the handle of the chair while being pushed. Bian rubbed his still partially open eyes and asked, Who is that? Xiaojiu cooperated and leaned his face closer, causing Bian to scream in surprise. This sound also drew the soldiers who had already entered the inn to rest to look towards that side. We want to beg for some food and drinks. I don't know if we're willing to. Xiaojiu said as he stroked the cowhide scabbard with his hand, which was short and sharp on his waist. Bian first heard the sound of armor and blades colliding, and then randomly followed the sound towards the direction touched by Xiaojiu's rough fingers. Only then did he realize that the real military master had arrived and said, Guest. Guest, how many of you do you have? Not many, only 30 or so people. 3. 30. Bian's tongue trembled with fear, almost rolling up. Then you have to find the shopkeeper. We don't have much food left. Then call out your shopkeeper. A tall man with a beard all over his face roared, Don't procrastinate, my brothers haven't had a good meal for a long time. Then he pulled out his sword and inserted it into the table in front of Bian. Bian was so scared that he let out an extremely sharp strange sound, curled up in the chair where the shopkeeper usually sat, and covered his head with his hands. After a fuss, the door to the room next to the stairs opened, and the shopkeeper nervously tidied up his attire. Then, he arched his hand and smiled, saying, Gentlemen, may I ask what I can do for you? Bring the best and most mellow wine from your store, our 30s are waiting. The tall man pushed away Xiaojiu, who was about to answer, and answered first. The shopkeeper swallowed his saliva and coughed twice. In a slightly lower voice than before, he asked, "Do you have enough money with you? Do you dare to ask us how much money we use?" The bearded man seemed very angry and grabbed the shopkeeper's collar, angrily saying, "If it weren't for us fighting on the front line, could you live a peaceful life here?" The shopkeeper was in great pain from being strangled. His eyes widened, his face full of fear, and he struggled to stand on tiptoe to maintain his balance. He said, "No one can be stable in this world." Bian looked helpless and could only sit there dumbfounded. Suddenly, the door to the room next to the two Xianbei people during the day was opened, and a short and chubby warrior from another race walked out first, shouting and cursing loudly, "It was annoying music just now, and now it's a fight. Do you want people to sleep peacefully?" The soldier with a sharp face and broad forehead went to the bearded man who was venting his anger and whispered, "Brother, he is a Xianbei person, just like the group who chased us." Xianbei. He put down the shopkeeper who was almost suffocated by the collar and turned to face the foreign warrior. "Xianbei. It's you people who have invaded our land, plundered our money and food, slaughtered and occupied our women and children. We are still forced to this situation now." After speaking, he drew out the single sword standing on the wooden table and pointed it at the Xianbei person in front of him, ordering, "Surround him." A tall and thin figure rushed out from behind Xianbei in front of him, deliberately speaking slowly, "We brothers have never done what you said before. But you Han people are now doing what you despise. Don't think that if you can speak Chinese, you're not the despicable Xianbei, a group of savage and cruel scumbags." The soldier with a pointed face and wide forehead fought back vigorously. "Big brother, we should take this opportunity to teach them a lesson." Then he drew his long sword and took on a battle posture. The Xianbei warriors were confident that they wouldn't show weakness, and the two of them showed their weapons one after another to prepare for the battle. In the midst of the encirclement, neither side dared to act recklessly. A Han soldier wanted to launch a surprise attack from the side, but unexpectedly, he had not been eating normally for many days to replenish his energy, and his hands and feet could not keep up with his thoughts. He was seen through by a tall and thin warrior from another race. The Xianbei samurai took a step back to avoid the stab, lowered his center of gravity, lowered his horse stance, and twisted his waist and hips to swing his sword horizontally. In the blink of an eye, a large incision was made in the chest of a Han soldier, and when he fell, blood spurted out, splashing onto the nearby earthen wall. His internal organs were faintly visible under the dim candlelight. This knife pierced through both the person and the armor, with full strength, and the blade was not stained with too much blood, indicating the superb skill of the wielder. The Xianbei warrior then sighed and wanted to intimidate other soldiers by saying, "It's been a long time since I've used a knife on anyone. Today, I'll bring you to practice your skills." The soldiers dared not act recklessly and wanted to surround these two warriors with a numerical advantage, waiting for their weaknesses to be exposed before killing them all. End of this chapter. Chapter 4. Drifting. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 4. Drifting. 4. At the moment when the two groups of people were facing each other, Bai Feng and Zhao Kuo, who were peering upstairs, were engaged in a fierce struggle in their hearts. Zhao Kuo, who was straightforward, broke the silence and said, "Brother Bai. I see so many Han soldiers, they can definitely help me. Let's go help them eliminate those two Xianbei people." "How can you be certain that they will definitely help you?" Bai Feng sneered coldly, "Just because we are both Han Chinese." Zhao Kuo answered with certainty, "I have a lot of silver on me, I can hire them. I ask you, which side is more trustworthy between a bandit and a shepherd?" Bai Feng's eyes were fixed on the crowded soldiers ahead, as if a fierce and aggressive falcon had met. The eagle watched in the dark as the falcon was plundering food, only to find the best opportunity to take away the food that the falcon was about to eat. Then he asked, "How can you guarantee that Han soldiers won't back out?" Zhao Kuo was momentarily stuttering, his brother Bai thinking. But the other party has a large number of people, what should we do? Bai Feng looked sideways at the end of the corridor and said, do you see the wine jar placed there? If I get trapped, you can launch a surprise attack with the wine jar from a high place. As long as you capture the enemy general, we can win. Zhao Kuo was surprised by Bai Feng's fearlessness in the face of danger, but in the current danger, he could only give it a try. He nodded silently. Then Bai Feng gently pushed open the wooden door that was slightly open and walked to the edge of the wooden corridor. With her left hand supporting the railing in front of her, she lightly climbed over it. At the same time, his right hand had already drawn out his long sword and jumped straight down from the second floor. The soldier standing at the entrance of the inn was hit from behind by a sudden, flying sword. The long sword penetrated the neck without armor, and the tip of the sword, stained with red blood, crawled out of the throat. Subsequently, the long sword was quickly drawn out, and with a swift flick, blood splattered onto the earth wall and ground. Before the soldier could even let out a mournful cry, he fell down in response. Bang! Everyone's eyes gathered here, and they saw that Bai Feng had already set up a battle ready to face the enemy. Big brother! He killed our cook! The soldier with a pointed face and wide forehead exclaimed in shock, surround him. The soldiers who did not participate in the siege of the Xianbei warriors were like frightened birds, hastily taking out their weapons in a combat posture. In an instant, Bai Feng was surrounded by sergeants number 7 and number 8, while the Xianbei brothers were still surrounded by several people in front of the door. The tall soldiers who looked like the leader of these bandits carefully examined the young man in front of them, and then said, little brother, I see that you are also Han Chinese. Why don't you join us in killing those 2 Xianbei people? I can forget about this. Bai Fengma did not respond and held his sword in both hands, with the tip facing the bearded man in front of him. As they spoke, the shopkeeper, Bian, and the Xianbei brothers on the side just realized that this young swordsman with rapid swordsmanship was a young guest who only arrived at the inn in the evening. The soldiers saw the young man not responding and felt a murderous intent in their hearts. A soldier behind Bai Feng raised his sword and quietly approached. At the brink of a major war, the confrontation among the 3 sides was evident in the eyes of Zhao Kuo. As the soldier who was about to launch a surprise attack on Bai Feng was about to succeed, he followed the plan and raised the brown pottery wine jar with both hands. He forcefully smashed it towards the soldier who was only 3 steps away from Bai Feng, launching a surprise attack. Bang! The wine jar hit the soldier's back of the head, shattering to the ground. The broken pottery scratched the skin on his head, and the wine from the jar seeped into the wound, causing immense pain. He threw down his weapon and knelt in place, covering his wounds with both hands, emitting a mournful cry. The attention of the crowd was once again diverted, and only the boy in cloth was waiting for this opportunity to launch an attack on the soldier leader in front of him. The young man strode forward, his body movements as fast as the wind, and his sword pointed straight at the wrist of the bearded man holding the sword, intending to surrender his weapons first and seize him to intimidate more soldiers. However, Bai Feng underestimated the battlefield veterans who had experienced numerous wars, massacres, and the front line of life and death. Although the bearded man was not quick to react, his years of combat experience came in handy at this moment. He instinctively swung his knife upwards, blocking the tip of his sword that was just a stone's throw away. With such great strength, Bai Feng was pulled back a step straight, and the tip of the long sword was bounced towards the sky. Bai Feng's weaknesses in his chest and ribs were exposed, and his expression lost its previous coldness. It was like a smooth and tidy white paper suddenly crumpled, and his pale face instantly had some unnatural wrinkles. Meanwhile, the second wine jar has already hit another soldier. But this time it hit the forehead. When the fragments fell, they scratched the skin on the face, and the wound immediately burst into a bright red. The wine in the jar flowed down into the wound, and the soldier immediately covered his face and fell to the ground in pain. At this point, Zhao Kuo had already been discovered hiding in the pavilion. Two soldiers were about to go upstairs and capture him, but Zhao Kuo seemed unaware. Bai Feng slowed down his steps and straightened his field of vision. Unexpectedly, the bearded man waved his sword forward, and Bai Feng narrowly avoided it with his lightning-fast body movements. The tip of the knife scraped open a gap on Bai Feng's collar. If it were an ordinary person, at this moment, their chest would probably have been cut horizontally, exposing blood and bones to the air. The young swordsman's dodge happened to move only 2 or 3 steps away from a soldier who was surrounded, and the soldier just realized that the swordsman in front of him had almost killed his boss. "Let's die." The soldier exerted all his strength and prepared to charge forward, intending to knock down Bai Feng with one move. At the critical moment, Zhao Kuo's voice came from upstairs. "Brother Bai, be careful." Then came the sound of the wine jar shattering all over the ground. Bai Feng glanced sideways at the soldier who had already fallen to the ground and mourned. Following that, Zhao Kuo said in a childlike innocent tone, "I've been hit again. Didn't I want to beg for a drink? I'll let you drink enough now." Bai Feng vaguely saw 2 black figures approaching Zhao Kuo's side, while at the same time, he roared at the wealthy young master on the tower like a sudden realization, "Brother Zhao, be careful behind your back." Zhao Kuo was about to turn around when a knife light flashed past him, and a blood mark appeared on his left arm. The bearded man standing opposite Bai Feng let out a giggle and said to the young man in front of him in a tone that seemed to have succeeded in his plan, "Young man, your friend's wings are also hard to escape, including you. I advise you to let go of your weapons, maybe I will save you from death." As Bai Feng frowned and gritted her teeth to contemplate ways to reverse the current situation, a scream suddenly came from above the tower. A soldier fell from there and hit the missing corner of the table with his head when he fell to the ground, fainting. Just now, Zhao Kuo, who claimed to be not skilled in martial arts, actually defeated one of the soldiers with 1 enemy and 2 enemies. After sorting out her thoughts, Bai Feng decided to launch another attack on the bearded Han. Unexpectedly, at this moment, the great Han had approached half of Bai Feng's position and swung his sword in the air, preparing to slash him. At the same time, he announced in a victorious tone, "If you look around on the battlefield, you will not be far from death." Bai Feng raised his sword with both hands to face the blow, and the blade and blade met directly. The result was obviously that the strong bearded man, who had a greater advantage in strength, had an advantage. After a burst of sparks, Bai Feng's long sword was hacked into a gap, and the blade presented a cracked shape like a dry field. The two of them held each other for a moment, and as they saw the sword of the great man gradually approaching Bai Feng's right shoulder, this young swordsman, who was just starting out, had become a candle swaying in the wind and rain, and could be extinguished at any moment. At this moment, his gaze suddenly became cold and he looked straight ahead. I saw Bai Feng suddenly take half a step back from his supporting feet, tying the horse's stance even lower. Then he changed his way of wielding the sword. Originally blocking with the blade was changed to blocking with the blade, and at the same time, he took a big step forward with the power accumulated from that half step. "Drink." The young man's body pressed against the sharp-bearded man's sword while driving his long sword forward. Originally, Bai Feng's previous display of weakness was just to find such an opportunity to defeat the enemy with just one move. The sparks generated by the friction between the blade and the blade drew a beautiful arc in the air. The bearded man couldn't react and stumbled back a few times, while the tip of the long blade in Bai Feng's hand had already crossed the handle and pointed straight at the man's wrist. A bright red streaked through the murky air. I saw blood splattering from the twisted bearded man's wrist, with wounds deep into his muscles and bones. Then, his weapon fell to the ground with a clang, and his left hand knelt in pain while covering the wound. Bai Feng seized the opportunity and swiftly moved behind the bearded man like an arrow, grabbing his loose hair with his left hand and pressing his sword against his throat with his right hand. "What you just said, I will return it to you in its original form," Bai Feng said as she pressed the sword edge closer to the skin of the man's throat. The sharp blade cut through the rough and dry skin, and in a dim environment, slightly dark red blood gurgled out, flowing along the blade to the tip of the sword. Then, the blood gathered into droplets and slowly dripped in front of the bearded man. The big man watched as his blood continued to flow out, and his inner fear was self-evident. He widened his eyes helplessly at the tip of his sword and whimpered, "Great hero, don't kill me." Then his trembling voice continued to emit a sobbing wail. The astonishment of the other soldiers present was evident, and their already almost crumbling morale became even more precarious after the leader was captured. "Tell your subordinates to drop their weapons and go as far as they can." The young man's tone was not too excited, but still remained calm and bewildering. Then, the bearded man continued to roar, trying not to let his voice tremble. Compared to when he was just showing off his strength, he had a slightly feminine and sharp voice, calling out to all his subordinates to obey Bai Feng's request. Then, with the help of Xiaojiu, he dragged his weakened body due to excessive blood loss away from the Xianjiangpo Inn. End of this chapter. Chapter 5. Drifting. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 5. Drifting. 5. After all the soldiers left the inn, Bai Feng's heart that had been hanging on for a long time finally came to rest. Then he turned his head and walked towards the wooden staircase leading to the tower, searching for his companion who had planned the conspiracy together. Unexpectedly, halfway through, I heard the sound of fighting still. So the young swordsman quickly quickened his pace and rushed to Zhao Kuo's side. I saw Zhao Kuo wrestling with a soldier on the wooden corridor while shouting loudly, "How can I let you go? Dare to ambush me and even cut through my favorite clothes." At first, Zhao Kuo pressed the soldier under him and used his fists to continuously attack the soldier's head. The soldier raised his arms to cover his head and resist the momentum. Suddenly, the soldier seemed to bear the humiliation and pushed his left leg upwards, instantly turning Zhao Kuo upside down. In an instant, the soldier wanted to reverse the suppressed situation and took the opportunity to roar while rushing towards the wealthy young master. However, due to the significant difference in strength, Zhao Kuo, who quickly stood up, easily counterattacked and knocked down the weak soldier again, pressing against his throat and completely subduing the opponent. "Speak up, surrender not surrender. I, cough cough. I, throw." This hilarious scene caught Bai Feng's eye. Zhao Kuo let go of the weak soldier who was bound by him, stood up with great enthusiasm, and didn't forget to stretch out his feet and kick the dying soldier to repeatedly confirm that he had lost the ability to resist. Finally, walking towards Bai Feng, a proud smile naturally appeared on his face and he said, "I thought they were so strong that they all seemed like they hadn't eaten." Bai Feng observed the broken long sword in her hand and replied, "Perhaps they didn't eat. Brother Bai, you really have the ability. You actually drove away dozens of soldiers." Zhao Kuo said with admiration on his face. "By the way, how did Brother Bai come up with this strategy?" Even in such a critical moment, he remained calm and composed, which really impressed me. The saying goes, "Capture the king first." Bai Feng sighed as he looked at the broken blade in his hand, which had an extra gap, and then replied, "Not to mention a group of desperate thieves." Zhao Kuo couldn't bear his temper and wanted to quickly catch a glimpse of the mystery, so he interjected and asked, "How can I say this?" Bai Feng glanced at Zhao Kuo and said, "We'll talk about these things later. Brother Zhao should first find a rope to tie up the captured prisoners, and I'll find a weapon from the group of soldiers to weigh my hands with." Then Bai Feng threw Zhao Kuo in place without looking back, and the latter sighed helplessly, obediently following Bai Feng's instructions. Bai Feng walked down the tower randomly, and Zhao Kuo held onto the hands of the captured soldiers and followed closely behind. The two of them returned victorious, and their faces were filled with joy. But the mood of the people downstairs still seemed to have not recovered from the danger just now. A Bian gently stroked the shopkeeper's back to follow his breath on the side. The Xianbei warriors were searching for the bodies of the soldiers they had killed, while complaining that these deserters had nothing more than themselves. The crowd followed the footsteps and looked towards the stairs. The young man in cloth only glanced at them and then walked towards the pile of discarded weapons. The wealthy young master, accompanied by a Han soldier, stumbled down the stairs. Zhao Kuo saw the shopkeeper beside him and approached to inquire if there was a sturdy rope. The soldier on the brink of death before the shopkeeper met, who had just been struggling, suddenly improved by 70.8%. He said with full confidence, "Ah bien, go and get it." After a while, the soldiers tied with thick ropes were left hanging on the side, still unconscious. And the shopkeeper, Ah bien, and Zhao Kuo waited beside the soldiers. Under the eyes of these three people, Bai Feng picked up weapons scattered all over the ground. He later said that the blade of this sword was heavily rusted. After a while, he said that the knife was too heavy and felt at ease, pacing between the ruins left by the group of Han soldiers. In a moment, the taller warrior among the Xianbei brothers walked towards Bai Feng, with admiration in his eyes. He called out to the young man in cloth who was searching for a weapon to weigh his hand and said, "Little brother. If it weren't for your help just now, we two brothers wouldn't have been able to retreat completely. We Xianbei people have always had gratitude and revenge. If there is anything that little Ngong needs us to do, our brothers will definitely not hesitate." Bai Feng picked up the long sword she had just picked up from the ground and smiled, saying, "I didn't mean to help your two brothers out of trouble. On the contrary, I just used you as bait to lure away most of the soldiers with combat power. So that I can take the bearded man hostage and drive away these bandits. So, I am not your benefactor." The Xianbei samurai was puzzled and said, "May I ask if Ngong is belittling us?" In fact, Bai Feng made this statement to set aside the unequal relationship with the Xianbei brothers as benefactors and beneficiaries. What he wanted was a capable partner. He is well aware of the complexity of human hearts, and Xianbei people will never willingly associate with him just because of this matter. The safest approach is to make the interests of both parties relevant. For this reason, Bai Feng replied, "Of course not. I'm just speaking my mind. However, I advise you two brothers to leave this place quickly. According to the soldiers just now, the pursuers will soon be found here. But at the ends of the earth, I really don't know where to escape." The Xianbei warrior looked out the door at the still dark sky, following the starlight forward, looking further and further. "Let's go back to the north." Bai Feng walked up to him and the two of them walked shoulder to shoulder. Then he said earnestly, "Aren't you and your brothers tired of life in the Central Plains? Coincidentally, my friends and I are also going north." The Xianbei warrior smiled and looked at the young swordsman, seemingly understanding his meaning. He said, "So. May I ask if my brothers and I can go with you?" Bai Feng remained silent, only responding with the same smile, everything in silence. "My Han name is Tuoba Chong, and my younger brother's name is Tuoba Ruo." The Xianbei warrior arched his hand and looked behind him. "Oh. Where has he gone?" "I just saw him return to the room with a tired expression on his face," said Bai Feng. "Oh my. When is it? I still want to sleep." The young man in cloth grinned at the foreign warrior who was taller than him in front of him, and continued, "Don't worry so much, brother Tuoba. We can wait for the first crow of the rooster before setting off." Then he bowed back and said, "I'm Bai Feng, please give me more guidance." The two reached an agreement in front of the half-folded corner table. Zhao Kuo and his group next to him all engraved what they had heard in their hearts, and they were all scratched by the middle-aged boy in cloth. Especially the shopkeeper. Previously, his impression of Bai Feng remained that ignorant and inexperienced young man who was ignorant of prices. But in the next moment, all old perceptions were extinguished. Zhao Kuo saw the two people talking and laughing happily, thinking that they had already reached an agreement, and wanted to go over to understand the situation. "Brother Bai. Seeing that you two are having a great conversation, I almost couldn't bear to interrupt it." Immediately, I looked meaningfully at Tuoba Chong, and the two of them stared at each other for a moment. Then Zhao Kuo grabbed Bai Feng's arm and moved away from the Xianbei man Tuoba Chong, lowering his voice and saying, "How could you ignore my wishes and directly reach an agreement with someone? I hired you." Watching Zhao Kuo almost grit his teeth as he spoke, Bai Feng put on a contented look and said, "This is the most reasonable strategy at the moment. If Brother Zhao has a better way, there's no need to act according to my wishes. If there's a better way, I still need your help." Zhao Kuo muttered reluctantly. "Brother Zhao, try to let go of your prejudices and slowly accept them." Bai Feng faced the young man in front of her, who was half his head tall, with one hand resting on his shoulder, as if coaxing a child, saying, "If it weren't for them, we might not have lived tonight, so they can also be considered half of our life-saving benefactors." After careful consideration, Zhao Kuo only listened well to Bai Feng's advice and went to show goodwill with Tuoba Chong, promising to give generous compensation after the matter was completed. The matter has finally come to a temporary end, and everyone can finally enjoy this moment of peace. After everyone returned to their room to rest, only Bai Feng remained in place, waving the iron sword he had just found. "After trying out the new weapon, I wanted to sit down and rest, but suddenly caught my attention by the flickering flames on the candlestick. The wick was about to burn out, so the young swordsman instinctively wanted to replace it. As I approached, I was trapped by the small warmth, as if lost in thought, recalling some past events." He stared at the flames for half a moment until they were completely extinguished. Walking to the entrance of the inn, he looked towards the direction that the Xianbei man Tuoba Chong had just seen, which was also the direction he had come from himself, and silently said, I will definitely come back." After the first crow of the rooster in the morning, the 4 people who had been arranged were dressed up and ready to go. Just as Bai Feng stepped out of the inn, the sound of the shopkeeper stopped the 4 of them. "Ladies and gentlemen, please stay." After hesitating for a moment, Bai Feng said in confusion, "What's wrong? Is it because the rent is not enough?" "What about the rent? Everyone is my lifesaver. Needless to say, I can't open my shop anymore. So I'm going to leave here and go back to my hometown. It's my guy. You see, I can't protect myself. If I take another person with me, it will make the road more dangerous." So you want him to come with us?" "Ah. Yes, the shopkeeper quickly replied, "That child was picked up by me from a dilapidated small village. Since that day, I have been letting him be my assistant and have not seen much of the world. However, he is proficient in laundry, cooking, and other miscellaneous tasks. He can also help you on the way. Moreover, it is better to have him follow you several skilled warriors than to follow me as an old man." Bai Feng looked at the young man Jiabian hiding behind the shopkeeper with a hint of pity in his eyes, and said, "It's possible, but we don't take in people who don't work." As Bai Feng spoke, she unburdened herself and said, "Besides laundry and cooking, I have one more thing to ask the Abian brothers." After speaking, Bai Feng handed the shao and gourd on his body to Abian and said, "These 2 things are very important to me. Please, Abian brothers, take good care of them." "Me, can I?" Abian's tongue began to tremble again. "From now on, you will be our partner." Suddenly, the shopkeeper gave a few words of advice to Abian before leaving, causing Abian to burst into tears like a girl's home. Finally, Bai Feng repeatedly promised to protect Abian before allowing the 2, father and son, to separate. In this way, Zhao Kuo, Bai Feng, and 5 others began their journey on the mountain path washed by the morning sun. End of this chapter. Chapter 6. Fragments. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 6. Fragments. 1. The grass and wild flowers soaked in morning dew carry a unique fragrance, while the 5 companions walk towards Yangqing with the fragrance. Half a day after setting off, everyone found a flowing stream for temporary repair. Bai Feng, who couldn't fall asleep last night, lay in the middle of the weeds with a moment of rest, accompanied by grasshoppers chirping with their vacuums, grasshoppers jumping back and forth in the emerald green, along with the refreshing fragrance in their noses, quietly fall asleep. Suddenly, there was a sizzling sound of flames burning in the boy's ear. Opening his eyes, he found himself in a sea of fire, and the lush greenery of the past suddenly disappeared mysteriously without a trace. The young swordsman's breathing became increasingly rapid, only because he saw a man lying on the ground in front of him, with a sword inserted into his spine, on the brink of death. The man looked at Bai Feng, as if reaching out to grab the boy, muttering, "Feng air. Feng air." Then he held up his outstretched hand and died in pain. The man was immediately eroded by the raging fire, burning to ashes, and the sea of fire disappeared, replaced by an endless darkness. In the pitch black, Han Chinese faces similar to those of young people surrounded them. They were mocking the incompetence of the dead man recklessly and crazily, laugh at the timidity of that young man. Amidst the endless and complex laughter, there were also intermittent and poignant cries and screams from women. "Brother Bai, wake up quickly." Zhao Kuo shook the young man in front of him, seeing his breathing disorderly, sweating profusely, as if he had some urgent illness. Before this, the nightmare's minions tightly grasped Bai Feng's consciousness. It was only after hearing Zhao Kuo's shout that he realized he was in a past dream. But opening your eyes in reality is far more difficult than opening them in dreams. The more Bai Feng wanted to get rid of those malicious laughter, the more he felt bound. The string in my heart was tightly held by two big hands named past and reality, exceptionally tight, as if it was about to break at any time. At the moment of disconnection, it indicates that his consciousness is approaching collapse. In a moment, Tuoba Chong hurriedly rushed over with a green leaf in his hand, pretending to ask Bai Feng to open his mouth and take it down. Zhao Kuo saw this situation and immediately lifted the arm of the Xianbei warrior, shouting loudly, "What are you holding in your hand? Just stuff it into his mouth." "Zhao Gongzi, this is a calming herb. In my hometown, if you encounter someone like the White Brothers, as long as you put a small leaf under your tongue, you can wake up in a moment. Trust me." Seeing Tuoba Chang's eager appearance, Zhao Kuo no longer stopped him, and then helped up Bai Feng, who had already been covered in sweat and soil, and let him take the herbs. At this moment, Bai Feng, who was still struggling with the nightmare, suddenly felt a cool sensation under her tongue. In an instant, this cool feeling swept over her chest, causing the young man's previously tense nerves to slightly ease. He followed the call to his own voice and slowly opened his eyes. "Brother Bai, you finally woke up." Zhao Kuo looked happier than anyone else and said with great joy. Tuoba Chong also asked with concern, "Brother Bai, are you okay?" I just had a nightmare." Then, Bai Feng took out the herb under her tongue and asked, "Is this mint?" Calm down, refresh your mind. Did Brother Zhao take it for me? So this little thing is so useful." Zhao she looked like she had a sudden realization and begged Tuoba Chong for a piece to take in. She exclaimed in surprise, "You're so happy. You're so happy." After listening, Bai Feng suddenly said, "Thank you so much, Brother Tuoba." Then he looked at Zhao Kuo and joked, "I knew Brother Zhao wouldn't be so knowledgeable. He might have thought this was poisonous grass." "Brother Bai, you don't have to mock me like that. If you hadn't woken me up, I wouldn't have bothered to care about you." Zhao Kuo looked at Bai Feng and said angrily, "Look at your appearance again. Don't tell anyone you're a disciple of my Zhao family when you go out." Bai Feng rubbed her cheeks, her clothes were slightly stained with sand and mud, and her hair was also messy. The young man Jiran smiled, as if recalling a nightmare he had just had. He turned around and went to the river to wash and tidy up. Looking at the small fish rushing back and forth in the river, as well as the emerald green lake surface reflected by the surrounding forests, smelling the intoxicating fragrance from nature in my nose, I listened to the hilarious conversation between Zhao Kuo and Tuoba Roa behind me. Bai Feng felt an irreplaceable reality lingering in her heart, which was enough to dispel all the demons and monsters in her dream. "Fatty guy, take out the mint grass. No way. I picked it. If you have the ability, you can pick it yourself. I want to eat mint stewed chicken. If you don't make it for me, don't eat today. Bien saw that they couldn't stop arguing, so he advised, actually, you can make it very delicious without mint. After the meal, everyone rested for a moment. Compared to the solemn and quiet demeanor of the other three, Bien and Tuoba Roa were chatting and laughing, appearing very happy and contented, completely different from those who had only experienced life and death last night. Bien, I really like you. Next time, you should also make mint stewed chicken for me to eat. Tuoba Roa said as he used his inner elbow to imprison Bien's neck, slightly affectionate. Brother Tuoba, don't do this, I'm going to lose my breath. The remaining three of them were all just drinking water and soup, looking at them, lost in thought. Zhao Kuo's lips flickered with a hint of disdain as he said, I didn't expect them to be so familiar after only getting to know each other for a while. Perhaps it's the karma they cultivated in their past lives. Oh. Brother Bai also believes in the theory of gods and Buddhas. I only have a glimpse of one or two of them. Bai Feng put down the wooden bowl in her hand and immediately said, for 100 generations, I have come to cross the ship together, and for a past life, I have come to sleep together. Meeting all of you and sharing difficulties and food with you is not only a fate given by heaven, but also a blessing we have cultivated ourselves. This sentence is just a hope that those who meet and know each other can cherish this love relationship. After hearing this, Zhao Kuo chuckled and said, I can't explain the truth to you. It's just to save my sister. Lol. Shouldn't we have to go to Yangqing this time? He then filled a bowl of delicious wine brought from the inn after finishing his soup, drank it all in one gulp, and continued, in my opinion, those officials are just wine bags and rice bags that take people's money, but don't help people with disasters. That group of thieves has a large number and caused a lot of harm. I believe the government has some general knowledge of their whereabouts. Moreover, relying solely on the 5 of us, the risk of successfully rescuing Brother Zhao's sister is too high. Well. I rely entirely on you. Zhao Kuo's speech was unclear, afraid it was due to strong alcohol. Tuoba Chong replied, Master Zhao, why don't you stop drinking? We still have half a day to go. Okay. I won't drink anymore. Bai Feng and Tuoba Chong exchanged a smile and understood. The conflict between Zhao Kuo and the Xianbei ethnic group has finally been temporarily resolved. 5 people packed up and set off again. However, Zhao Kuo, who was still struggling with drunkenness and his footsteps were floating, was helped by Tuoba Chong to continue on his journey. The flying crows in the forest are still playing, and the singing of birds is lingering and lingering. Unfortunately, they have no time to consider these beautiful moments, as the road ahead will only become more rugged. End of this chapter. Chapter 7. Fragments. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 7. Fragments. 2. As dusk approaches, the setting sun turns the road ahead bright red. The mournful cries of crows hovered in the sky, stopping on the wreckage of the roadside village, either picking up the cold food on the ground, or watching the 5 people walking towards us. Bai Feng saw the dilapidated house overgrown with weeds at her feet, and an incredulous expression appeared on her face. She couldn't help but sigh, how could this be? Zhao Kuo heard his friend muttering to himself and curiously asked, what's wrong? No, it's nothing. The west gate of Yangqing is ahead, Bai Feng replied. Oh. Zhao Kuo widened his eyes and looked at Bai Feng, as if he knew some secret. The walls of Yangqing are very dilapidated, not only overgrown with weeds and lacking bricks and tiles, but also have a large hole on the right side of the gate, which is enough for an adult man to pass through. The 5 of them saw that there were no soldiers guarding the door, so they walked straight in. Unexpectedly, a ragged person came up by the door and hugged Zhao Kuo's thigh, crying and shouting, Sir! Give me some money. I haven't eaten for several days. It wasn't until Zhao Kuo realized it, that he not only had sores on his hands, but also looked extremely ugly. He was wearing a brimless tattered hat, and a scar on his dirty face extended from the corner of his left eye to the corner of his left mouth. Seeing those dirty hands covered in black mud and dirt, as well as the yellow pus dripping from the sores on his hands, Zhao Kuo was scared and instinctively took a step back. He was only forced to stay in place by the strange man's relentless tug. "You! Quickly let go of me. I'll give it, I'll give it," Zhao Kuo said as he hurriedly took out a string of hanging money, but was stopped by Tuoba Chong. "Zhao Gongzi, wealth cannot be exposed." Zhao Kuo looked around at the sparse and desolate atmosphere of pedestrians, and confidently replied, "Brother Tuoba, you think too much. It's better to send him away with money." Bai Feng remained silent, only observing carefully from the side. He stared intently at the sores on the beggar's hand, as if he had seen them before. The beggar saw the long hanging money and immediately let go of Zhao Kuo, thanking him repeatedly. "Do you know where there is an inn?" Bian pushed away Zhao Kuo, who was tidying up his clothes, while holding his exhausted body. The little beggar hurriedly put away the hanging money, pointed to the alley behind him, nodded, and replied, "Turn around the alley ahead and keep walking until you see one." "Bian, let's split half of our remaining dry rations with him," Bai Feng, who had been silent for a while, suddenly said. Bian looked puzzled as he looked at the little beggar's exceptionally thin body, pale skin next to his ulcers, and delicate voice. He understood in his heart that Bai Feng was pitying this weak child, and furthermore, he had also entered a city with more abundant resources. As long as he had money, it would be much easier to purchase food and clothing than before. So he divided half of the white flower mantle he carried to the little beggar. After parting with the little beggar, the five of them walked into the dim alley. The alley is on the shady side of the tall tiled house next to it, and due to the lack of sunlight all year round, it makes people feel gloomy outside. A gust of wind blows, and one can't help but tighten their body to resist that moment of shivering. Bai Feng, who was walking ahead, suddenly stopped the four people behind her and saw the figures of the two slowly emerging from the road ahead. "Be careful!" Bai Feng roared. A tall and thin man holding a strange long hooked weapon stood on the left side. On the other side was a man holding an axe the size of a logging axe, dragging his massive and round body almost 8 feet long. They are all wearing tight-fitting clothes that lean towards gray, and when viewed from a distance, they blend almost seamlessly with the surrounding environment. "It's already too late. Poor stranger, hurry up and hand over the money," said the man with the axe. Bai Feng and his group carefully moved back slowly, only to find a man's voice coming from behind. "Where do you want to run? Little fat sheep." Zhao Kuo looked back and saw a burly man holding a big knife, with his chest open and his breasts exposed. The thick fur on his chest was particularly noticeable. When everyone realized they were surrounded by bandits, Zhao Kuo suddenly shouted, "Wow! Look!" The other four of them immediately looked in the direction Zhao Kuo pointed out. Behind the burly man. I saw the little beggar who had just left hiding at the edge of the alley, still holding the white mantle given by Bian. When he realized that he had been seen by Zhao Kuo and the others, he couldn't help but shed sweat on his forehead. The scar that extended from the corner of his left eye to the corner of his left mouth slipped down his face. Seeing this scene, Zhao Kuo was furious and constantly scolded him as a scammer. "This little scammer, he actually betrayed us." Tuoba Chong looked helpless and had no choice but to draw his sword to fight. After the little beggar discovered that the scar was exposed, he covered his left face and hurriedly slipped away. The two groups of people faced off for a long time, and due to the large number of people, Bai Feng and his group forced the bandits not to act recklessly. In order to protect Bian and Zhao Kuo, who were not proficient in martial arts, Bai Feng decided to form a team with Tuoba Roa to fight against the man who wielded the long hook weapon and the man who wielded the giant axe, and Tuoba Chong protected the two of them from behind, dealing with the burly man alone. The two of them, who did not know martial arts, were in a position between Bai Feng and Tuoba Chong. The first to take action were two people holding a long hook and a giant axe weapon. They first distanced themselves from each other, left and right, and then slowly approached Bai Feng and Tuoba Roa. Almost at the same time, the man with the long hook launched an attack on Tuoba Roa. He deliberately feigned an attack on Tuoba Roa's sword, hoping to use the hook to restrict his weapons, and the tall man of the giant axe was even more like a long sword that aimed straight at the white phoenix, wanting it to be like a tree. Even if it was just a fierce clash of blades, cracks would inevitably appear on the sword. So Bai Feng had to dodge left and right, and occasionally had to guard against the sneak attacks of the long hook. As Bai Feng resisted, he pondered, their strategy is to first surrender the opponent's weapons. And their cooperation is very tacit, probably working together for many years. And he only met Tuoba Roa for a day, and after a long battle, he only suffered one defeat. On the other side, Tuoba Chong and the powerful man who wielded the sword were in an inseparable battle. If even Tuoba Chong couldn't hold on, the consequences would be unimaginable. Just as Bai Feng was pondering for a moment, a delicate voice spread from behind Bai Feng to the ears of everyone in the alley. "Officer, right ahead." Then came the sound of footsteps, and dozens of soldiers surrounded from the beginning and end of the alley. "Unload all your weapons, if not, you will be shot to death." The leading gunman was majestic, with two 8-character beards on his lips and a goatee under his lips. The sharp gaze made people dare not disobey his instructions. Wearing Han army armor, holding a red tassel gun on the right, standing about 7 feet high, with an agile posture. After hearing this, everyone threw down their weapons, and the burly man looked disdainfully at the leading gunman, who was then taken away by 2 soldiers. Finally, both groups of armed fighters were taken back to the Yangqing County government. End of this chapter. Chapter 8. Fragments. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 8. Fragments. 3. Who is the person under the hull? I am Zhao Qua, a native of the northern Yui town. Oh. The judge before the case hesitated and asked, "What is your connection to the Zhao family of the imperial barbarians?" Zhao Qua replied, "Zhao Wei, the head of the Zhao family, is my father." The judge gently stroked his long beard and exclaimed, "So it's the son of Zhao." The Zhao family of Yue has always been engaged in trade with my Yangqing, and your father is my good friend. But I don't know why the eldest son came to my Yangqing alone. My father has encountered some issues. Let's wait until this matter is resolved before we can discuss the details. The county government office at night was completely different from what Bai Feng and his group heard and saw when they first entered the city, all because there were 5 unknown outsiders gathered here, as well as 3 captured bandits. The few people around Prince Zhao are. They are my disciples, adults can rest assured. Su has something he doesn't understand. Su Taisho slowed down his tone and said, "Are these 2 Xianbei people also disciples of the young master?" Zhao Qua respectfully replied, "Your Excellency, there is no need to worry. They are indeed my disciples." Su Taisho recalled earnestly, "You should know that the 7 Towns Rebellion 10 years ago had a profound impact. That adult may not know the word Yui Town, because the Han and Xianbei people there understand and tolerate each other. Without further ado, do you know who those 3 people are?" Su Taisho pointed to the 3 people next to Zhao Qua and said. Zhao Qua shook his head and denied, "I really don't know. Those 3 people are the bandits who have been harming Yangqing in recent months. The Black Wind 3 demons. The city guards have pursued them multiple times but have not been successful. This time, it is all up to Zhao Gongzi to capture them and bring them to justice. I dare not, I dare not." On the left side of Zhao Qua and his group is the Black Wind 3 demons, being bound by various flowers, while the little beggar who sneaked away is on the right side. If you want to kill or cut, do as you please. The burly man who wielded the knife roared angrily and kept showing his teeth in the direction of the little beggar, his face so fierce that he kept his head down and dared not speak. Su Taisho took the token from the table and threw it out, saying, "Applause, 30 times." The burly man was severely punished, but he did not let out a painful cry. Only the sound of a clap of his hand could be heard from him. The two companions beside him lowered their heads deeply, afraid to follow him in disdain of the court. "Little beggar, don't be afraid. Tell me your name and what happened." Su Taisho lowered his voice and asked the little beggar. Unexpectedly, Zhao Kuo suddenly said, "Sir, you can't believe him. It was he who led me into the deep alley and ambushed me by the thieves." Zhao Kuo walked up to the little beggar, tore off the scar, and confidently said, "Look, this scar is fake, let alone the sore on his hand." "No, the sores on this hand are real," a cold and stern voice interrupted Zhao Kuo's words. Zhao Kuo looked puzzled and asked, "Brother Bai, why can't even you see the truth clearly?" "It is precisely because I have seen them that I know these rotten sores are real," Bai Feng said as he gazed at the little beggar from afar through Zhao Kuo and remained silent. "You two young people, be calm and don't be impatient," Su Taisho said. "This young master Bai is quite reasonable. If this beggar is a fellow of the Black Wind Three Devils, then he will definitely not come to the county government to report an official." "What? He reported it as an official?" Zhao Kuo exclaimed in surprise. Bai Feng said to Zhao Kuo, "Brother Zhao, sometimes we can't just look at the appearance of things without knowing the meaning behind them. Let's listen to his explanation." "Little beggar, answer the question just now, don't be afraid," Su Taisho continued. The little beggar took off his tattered hat and draped his fluffy and black hair down his shoulders. He pulled down the cuffs, covered the sores on his hands, and wiped the mud on his cheeks with his sleeve. Zhao Kuo's eyes were fixed on the side, his slightly open mouth revealing his inner surprise. The others in the court were all like this. The little beggar was actually a young girl. Although dressed in rags, she still couldn't conceal her delicate features. Although her face was devoid of blood and covered in dust, it still couldn't erase the youth and innocence flickering in her eyes. "Sir, my daughter's name is Jiangling, and she is from Xianyang village in the outer city of Yangcheng. I didn't mean to deceive Mr. Zhao, but because of my daughter's identity, in order to avoid many inconveniences when begging outside, I picked up a piece of pig's skin and made it look like a scar." Su Taisho frowned tightly, wanting to quickly understand the causes and consequences, and said, "You keep talking." "As usual, my daughter crouched down in the west of the city to beg. Fortunately, I met Mr. Zhao who was willing to give money, and Mr. Bai who gave me mantu. I will remember your kindness all my life." As soon as the words ended, Jiangling fell on her knees and kowtowed. As she was about to kowtow for the second time, Bai Feng stopped her and helped her stand up. "Miss Jiang, this is just a small matter, you don't have to worry about it." Jiangling suddenly raised her voice, even though it was still so delicate and powerless. "No, if it weren't for the money and food donated by our benefactors, my brother and I might have starved to death on the streets. Great kindness, never forget." Zhao Kuo was deeply ashamed of his charming and graceful figure just now. Jiangling continued to speak, saying, "After a moment of separation from my benefactors, these three people appeared in front of me. I watched them dressed in black, holding weapons, and thought of the rumored Black Wind Three Devils. Suddenly, I was afraid. It was because these Black Wind Three Devils had been observing in the dark, intending to obtain the money from Zhao Gongzi. They threatened me with life and death, and I remembered my younger brother at home before telling them the whereabouts of my benefactors. And then you announced what you saw and heard to the county government." Governor Su asked. Jiangling nodded and glanced sideways at Zhao Kuo, then quickly nodded and stopped speaking. Su Taisho asked with concern, "May I say one more word? What's the matter with the ulceration on Miss Jiang's hand?" This is a disease that fell before." Jiangling grabbed her left elbow with her right hand, tightening her body as if unwilling to answer this question. Su Taisho sighed and said, okay. Now that there are all personal and material evidence, I declare that the Black Wind Three Devils will be imprisoned and executed on the same day. After leaving the hall, Zhao Kuo and Bai Feng went to Su Taisho's study to discuss business, while the other three went back to the inn to pack up. After lighting the oil lamp in the room, Su Taisho skillfully signed official documents and answered Zhao Kuo's questions. Mr. Su, do you know that a caravan has been attacked by bandits near Yangqing in recent months? Zhao Kuo urgently asked as he approached. Is that the Zhao family's caravan? Exactly. My father and younger sister were both kidnapped by thieves, and I am weak and have to seek help from the government. Su Taisho sighed and said helplessly, to be honest, Su had already sent all the guards of Yangqing to conquer that group of bandits half a month ago. Now there are only a few dozen militiamen in the city. Is there any news about that group of bandits? You can ask the militia leader Wu Yi for detailed information. However, if you want to borrow troops or manpower, it's really difficult to comply. Yangqing has just solved the case of the Black Wind Three Devils and urgently needs manpower to consolidate public order and restore normal life for the people. Well. Okay, Zhao Kuo replied. It's getting late, let's talk about it tomorrow. Su Taisho spoke firmly, and Zhao Kuo and Bai Feng had to make another plan. Under the stone lion outside the county government office, Jiang Ling stood there waiting for a long time. Seeing Zhao Kuo and Bai Feng finally coming out of the room, she walked over and stopped halfway, saying, Zhao Gongzi and Bai Gongzi, Jiang Ling has once again thanked the two benefactors here. Without you reporting to the government, we wouldn't have easily escaped, so Miss Jiang is also kind to us. Bai Feng smiled and said. Jiang Ling raised the corner of her mouth and glanced slightly askance at Zhao Kuo. I saw Zhao Kuo deliberately lowering his head, pretending to be an outsider. Jiang Ling continued, young Master Bai, Jiang Ling has something to ask for. Speak up. Since Mr. Bai has seen the sores on my hand, he must know that my life is not long anymore. So, could you please help my younger brother Jiangming find a good family to take care of him? Bai Feng frowned and said, okay, I will do my best. After hearing this, Zhao Kuo felt that his recent remarks were too absurd and could not be forgiven. And Bai Feng also seemed to remember some past events. The three of them stood there in silence for half a moment, until Jiang Ling spoke the next paragraph to break the heavy atmosphere. Zhao Gongzi, can you tell me how old you are this year? Me. I'm 19. Zhao Kuo said hesitantly. Jiang Ling said playfully, I saw your temples covered in white hair, and I thought you were an old man. I can't believe you're younger than me, hee. Zhao Kuo said regretfully, Miss Jiang, I'm sorry. It was just a moment of impulse that I said something wrong. It's okay. Hee. Jiang Ling's smiling face, even on that sickly little face, was enough to warm Zhao Kuo's heart and prevent him from feeling so guilty. End of this chapter. Chapter 9. Fragments. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 9. Fragments. 4. Sparkling little stars scattered densely on the horizon, illuminating the path of the two hiking under the full moon. They walked through the deep alley where they had just fought fiercely and entered the inn they had originally intended to reach. Tuoba Chong, Tuoba Roa, and Abian had already gone to bed, but Bai Feng and Zhao Kuo didn't even have dinner. Zhao Kuo and Bai Feng sat by the window, while the former shouted, Master, come over quickly. Ah, here we are. The waiter, who was dozing off in the chair, straightened his clothes and draped a slightly yellowish white cloth over his left shoulder. He hurriedly rushed to Zhao Kuo's side, wiping the table and saying, Sir, you have finally arrived. Governor Su specially instructed the small shop to treat the heroes of this city well. What would you like to eat? What is the most famous dish in your store? Zhao Kuo asked. The sauce beef in the small shop is well known far and wide. Then give me 2 pounds. The waiter turned around and went to the kitchen to urge the dishes to be served. Then Zhao Kuo said to Bai Feng, "How can we eat beef without good wine? Let me go find 1 or 2 pots." "Brother Zhao, I don't need to," said Bai Feng. "You don't drink alcohol. Why do you carry a gourd all day?" "That gourd is something very important to me. Besides, the gourd is just a container and may not be used to hold wine." "Tisk, brother Bai, how many things did you keep from me? When the time is ripe, I will naturally tell you." "Okay, I'll drink it myself." As soon as he finished speaking, Zhao Kuo left his seat to search for wine. When he returned, the sauce beef had also been delivered, so the two of them chatted while eating. Zhao Kuo took the lead in asking, "Brother Bai, you see I've already reported my own family. If you don't say something about yourself, don't you feel sorry?" "All right." Bai Feng took a sip of tea and said, "Do you know why I recognize the sore on Miss Zhang's hand?" Zhao Kuo was puzzled and said, "Why?" "Because my elder sister Yi died from this kind of illness." Yeah. Zhao Kuo filled a bowl of wine in a ceramic bowl the size of his palm, drank it all in one gulp, and then said, "Why do you have Ijie?" "On our way to Yangcheng, we passed by the ruins of a village, which is Xianyang village to the west of the city. I once lived there." Zhao Kuo said slightly tipsy, "I know that. At that time, your behavior was too abnormal. What about your parents?" Bai Feng looked out the window at the bright moon and starry sky, squinting her eyes with tears lingering in her eyes. She said, 6 years ago, Xianbei Iron Cavalry attacked Yangcheng and pacified Xianyang village. My parents both died tragically under the soldiers. If it weren't for Sister Yi's desperate efforts to save them, I would probably have gone with my parents." Zhao Kuo's face, which had been relaxed from drunkenness, became serious after listening to that passage and said sympathetically, Bai, are you okay?" "Haha." Bai Feng sneered, "Every time I see Miss Jiang, I always think of my righteous sister. If it weren't for the sake of keeping me alive, she wouldn't have developed that incurable disease." What were you doing for the next 6 years?" "I met my master, and that flute and gourd are his old man's belongings." Zhao Kuo suddenly said, "No wonder you always bring them with you." Then he picked up a piece of beef and put it into Bai Feng's bowl, saying, "Brother Bai, take your time to eat. Don't drink anymore, we still have to get down to business tomorrow." "Okay, I won't drink anymore," Zhao Kuo said as he wiped away the remaining drops of wine from the corners of his mouth. After chatting and eating, the two of them went back to their rooms to rest. The next day, Bai Feng and Zhao Kuo tidied up their appearance early in the morning and planned to visit the militia leader Wu Yi. After arriving at the place instructed by Governor Su, they began to search for the whereabouts of Wu Yi. Inside the stone walls stand 3 earthen-tiled houses, with the largest one in the middle standing in front of a row of various long spears. Some long, some short, some with gorgeous dragon patterns, and some with red tassels. And they all have one striking similarity. The gun body is spotless, and the gun head shines with silver. It must be due to their owners' increased love and care. The 2 smaller tiled houses are separated on both sides, and a larger space is enclosed in the middle of the 3 houses. Therefore, the militia leader Wu Yi should have practiced martial arts here on weekdays. Bai Feng and Zhao Kuo walked straight towards the middle house because its door was open. Approaching, a woman dressed in plain clothes was cleaning the house. Zhao Kuo approached and asked, "May I ask if the militia leader Wu Yi lives here?" The woman looked up and saw 2 young people with unfamiliar faces. With a hint of panic, she replied, "Are you?" "It was Governor Su who sent us here," Bai Feng arched his hand and said. "Oh, I'll call him out now." A moment later, a slender man dressed in a blue suit walked over. He first spoke up and said, "2 young heroes, Wu Yi is really far from welcoming." Zhao Kuo replied, "You don't need to be polite. Are you clear about what I asked Governor Su about?" Wu Yi said calmly, I understand. To be honest, in fact, I have been in contact with the guards who went out of the city to conquer through pigeon communication. So I can roughly understand their situation. Please inform me as soon as possible, Brother Wu. At present, they are camping 50 miles south of the bandit camp, forming a stalemate with the bandits. However, in terms of military strength, the enemy has 500 people and more than 100 war horses, we only have 400 people, and only the commanders and scouts of each department have at most 30 war horses. Therefore, we are at a disadvantage in terms of military strength. However, I have good news and bad news. Let's talk about the good news first, Zhao Kuo said. The good news is that a few days ago, we rescued more than 100 abducted civilians from the hands of bandits, including those you may be looking for. Wu Yi cleared his throat with a cough and then said, the bad news is that more than 100 civilians mean we need to allocate some troops to protect them, which makes the war situation even more unfavorable. Can't we first withdraw the people to Yangqing? Bai Feng asked. The risk of doing this is too high. The group of thieves dispatched mobile cavalry outposts around the camp. If a portion of the troops were to protect the people's retreat, the enemy would take the opportunity to attack the camp, and our forces, which were already at a disadvantage, had almost no chance of winning. If the entire army retreated, our army's previous efforts would be in vain, and the bandits would only become more rampant. Wu Yi sighed helplessly as he looked at Bai Feng. Can you take us to the camp? Zhao Kuo said urgently. Zhao Gongzi is eager to be intimate, I understand. However, the sentries along the way are very dangerous and inhumane. They kill men whenever they see them, and take women back for their rape and humiliation. Zhao Kuo looked at the ground and said sorrowfully, is there really no other way? Seeing Zhao Kuo feeling so depressed, Wu Yi said decisively, there is a small path far from the main road, and there may not be any sentries on the way. I can take you there. However, try to have fewer people with you. Otherwise, the risk will be even greater. Zhao Kuo and Bai Feng looked at each other for a moment and nodded in greeting. When do those two plan to depart? Bai Feng joked, I don't think Mr. Zhao can wait until tomorrow. Let's go now. Zhao Kuo said with a determined gaze. Once the two of you are ready, we will gather in the north of the city. After Bai Feng and Zhao Kuo left Wu Yi's home, they directly returned to the inn to explain the situation to Tuoba Zhong, Tuoba Roa, and Abien. Finally, they decided to let Tuoba Roa and Abien stay in Yangqing to protect their personal property. And Tuoba Chong accompanied Bai Feng and Zhao Kuo. The three of them were walking in the morning market and saw many vendors and pedestrians already on the street. Vegetable farmers, meat butchers, hunters selling animal skins and meat in the mountains, as well as craftsmen selling various handicrafts. The scene they saw when they first arrived was completely different from that of Bai Feng. The three of them walked and chatted with great interest. Yangqing is truly a commercial hub in the south, with a vast variety of goods and a thriving flow of people far beyond my imagination, said Zhao Kuo. After all, this was once the capital city of the country, and the desolation we saw that day should be due to people's fear of the black-winged three devils, Bai Feng responded. Tuoba Chong sighed in his heart. Such a prosperous street scene, once destroyed by his own people, will now be in danger. For him, who is already tired of war and slaughter, he is not willing to let history repeat itself. Just as Tuoba Chong was pondering to himself, Wu Yi in front waved to Bai Feng in his group. He was wearing armor, with gauze tied to his wrists, ankles, and wrists. He had a protective goggles on his chest, 2 short guns on his back, and a dragon-patterned spear in his right hand, as if he was about to go to the battlefield to fight. Zhao Gongzi, put on these scales. Wu Yi held 3 sets of worn-out scales in his hand, which seemed to be able to withstand only one powerful attack. Bai Feng and Zhao Kuo successively put on armor, but Tuoba Chong refused. The leather armor I'm wearing is enough. Okay, I haven't consulted your name yet, Wu Yi asked. Tuoba Chong. The four of them walked more than 10 miles on the main road before turning and entering the small path. The path is very narrow, overgrown with thorns and ferns, and the skin can be scratched accidentally. Moreover, only one person can pass through it at a time, making it difficult to detect or set up ambushes for bandits. Everyone walked steadily along the way, with an unusually quiet surroundings, as if their voices had been frozen. Bai Feng, Zhao Qua, and Tuoba Chong, unaware of the terrain, could only follow the path passed by Wu Yi and found it difficult to pay attention to the surrounding things. Listen, there is the sound of water flowing. Wu Yi finally eased his tense nerves and said, as long as you pass through the wooden bridge in front, you will soon reach the camp. After speaking, everyone quickly walked out of the path and suddenly became enlightened. A bridge made of broken wood spans both sides in front of me, with a width just enough to accommodate one person, and 2 to 3 zhang below the bridge is a turbulent water flow. The sound of the water hitting the stones and the sound from both sides filled the ears of the four people. They crossed the bridge one by one, with Bai Feng walking at the end. Suddenly, a cold arrow shot from the opposite bank and hit Bai Feng's spleen. Bai Feng's limbs suddenly felt weak, losing balance and falling into the rapids. Wu Yi threw his short spear in the direction of the arrows firing, only to hear a scream, and a Han bandit fell from among the plants. Zhao Qua and Tuoba Chong eagerly shouted the name of Bai Feng, but Bai Feng, who had been hit by the arrow, was washed away by the water until he disappeared without a trace. The two of them had no choice but to give up and follow Wu Yi to the camp to discuss countermeasures. Bai Feng, who was washed downstream by the water, fell into a coma for a long time. From somewhere, a crisp sound of bells awakened his consciousness. He opened his eyes and vaguely saw a slender figure with a string of copper bells tied to his feet and dressed in yellow-green clothes. Then, feeling physically exhausted, I fell asleep again. End of this chapter. Chapter 10. Fragments. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 10. Fragments. 5. The boy with an arrow wound was bleeding by the river, losing consciousness. It is already midnight when they regain consciousness. After a sleepless day, Bai Feng was attracted by a faint warmth in front of him. He slowly opened his eyes, realizing that it was caused by the campfire swaying left and right in the night sky. He looked behind the firelight, and a pair of slender and dark eyes met him for a moment. Are you awake? You're finally awake. After speaking, the owner with the eyes bypassed the bonfire in the middle and came to Bai Feng's side. As he walked over, the crisp sound of copper bells ringing in his feet. Bai Feng observed around and found herself in a tree hole, weakly leaning against the trunk. He was dressed in his own clothes, and although the arrow wound had been treated, it still felt a faint pain. Through the flickering flames, he saw a slender figure following the sound and remembered what he had seen before falling asleep. Did this girl save him? With a doubt in mind, Bai Feng fixed her gaze on seeing the grace of her benefactor. The girl had a smiling face on her face. Her eyes curved like crescent moon, her nose slender and straight, her slender little mouth slightly open, her face as white as jade, and her eyebrows had a hint of exotic charm. However, her black braided hair and eyes were far from those of other races. After the girl approached Bai Feng, she pretended to take off her clothes. The young man panicked and accidentally touched his wound, moaning in pain. The girl said with a hint of resentment, "Don't move around. Let me see the wound." After smelling it, Bai Feng took off her clothes and let her examine and handle it. The wound is almost healing, but fortunately it only injured the skin and flesh. If the arrow goes deeper and damages the spleen, it will be difficult, the girl said after examining the wound. Bai Feng secretly felt fortunate in her heart. Thanks to the scales and armor gifted by Wu Yi, she was able to withstand the fatal blow. Then he observed his wound and asked, "Miss, may I ask you?" "Me?" The girl seemed very interested in this question, pondered for a moment, and then said with a pretentious and profound tone, "I am your destiny." Bai Feng was puzzled by this puzzling answer. He endured the excruciating pain and stuttered, What? What fate? He. The girl sat next to Bai Feng, covering her mouth and laughing. I know what you most want to do now is to help your righteous sister find her husband and repay her kindness. Bai Feng looked surprised and said, How do you know? Because I saw it. Perhaps it's because you have no idea about the solution to this matter. You've been thinking about it all day without any results, so I see it very clearly. Girl, who the hell are you? Others say my mother is a witch, so I should be the daughter of a witch. My name is Murong Yen, and you? Witch. Bai Feng said cautiously, Bai Feng, thank you for saving Miss Murong's life. Bai Feng realized that the girl's surname was not Han, so he asked, Is the girl from Xianbei? But her hair. Murong Yen playfully played with her braided hair and said, My father is Han, and my mother is from Xianbei. I don't know what the girl meant by witch just now. After thinking for a moment, Murong Yen said, There is a legend in the Xianbei tribe that there is a group of people born with the ability to telepathize, and their bloodline is called the bloodline of witches. Bai Feng did not believe in this superstition, but the girl did reveal something she had been thinking about day and night and couldn't find a way to solve. Don't you believe it? The girl showed a disappointed expression and said, These are all things my mother told me. At first, I didn't believe them either, until I met you today. Me? Bai Feng exclaimed in surprise. My mother told me that if one day I meet someone, when I first touch their body, memories and moments of that person will come to mind. That person is the one I am destined for, and his fate will be closely linked to me from then on. So, whether I live or die, I will follow him. As soon as the words finished, Murong Yen grabbed Bai Feng's left arm with her delicate hands, and leaned her body and face closer. Subconsciously, Bai Feng reached out her right hand to prepare to draw her sword, only to find that the sword on her waist was placed in the distance. She panicked and resisted, saying, What are you doing? The young man wanted to raise his arm and lift Murong Yen away, causing intense pain in the wound to hit again. Seeing Bai Feng limp on the ground, Murong Yen went up to help him up with concern and said gently, Why are you so reactive? I just want to see what you look like. Miss, please stop talking nonsense. We both don't know each other's origin, so it's better to be cautious. But I really know what you're thinking in your heart, how can you explain it? Haha. Bai Feng sneered and said, I wonder why the girl appeared alone in this wilderness. Do you doubt me? Murong Yen walked to the young man's sword with mixed sorrow and anger, and drew his sword to point at Bai Feng. Tears welled up in his dark eyes and he trembled as he said, You men are not good people. Dad knows his mother won't harm anyone, but he still allows her to be wronged and tragically killed by others. Bai Feng widened her eyes and looked at Murong Yen. Her slender body was dressed in a green lining, and a yellow light veil was draped over the outside, creating a wonderful layering of colors that stood out. The spirited and heroic posture of this young girl wielding a sword was deeply engraved in the young man's heart, and could not be forgotten for a long time, so much so that Bai Feng forgot that she was being pointed at by someone else with a sword. After he realized it, he hastily explained, Miss Murong, I'm sorry. I really can't convince myself, believe what you say. Murong Yen slowly approached Bai Feng. Suddenly, she threw her sword towards Bai Feng, rolled up the sleeve of her left hand, and showed the bleeding wound on her arm to the young man. She said sorrowfully, Do you think your broken scales can really withstand that arrow? Without my blood, your wound wouldn't have recovered so quickly. Bai Feng picked up the sword and carefully compared the shape of the wound and the blade, discovering a perfect match. Just as he was about to speak, Murong Yen collapsed to the ground due to exhaustion, and Bai Feng had to drag her injured body to hold her in her arms. He examined Murong Yan's wound and found that it was probably due to excessive emotions that caused the wound to rupture. The young man pondered in his heart. Although he found it difficult to accept the so-called fate and witch theories. But the strange girl in her arms did save her life and reveal her feelings. Bai Feng couldn't help but mutter to himself, what a fool. He didn't know whether he was mocking himself or talking about Morong Yan's actions, and then hugged Morong Yan even tighter in his arms. The two embraced each other and rested until dawn. After waking up, Morong Yan found herself lying in Bai Feng's arms, feeling both surprised and delighted. She decided to lie down until Bai Feng woke up. Suddenly, the young man looked drowsily at the sunlight shining in from outside the tree hole, and unconsciously moved his fingers. The touch of the light veil between his fingers, as well as the warmth emanating from under it, reminded him of last night's events and the strange girl in his arms. "Good morning, Brother Feng." The girl in her arms suddenly looked up at herself. Bai Feng stood up in fear and threw Morong Yan to the ground, causing her to bump her hand and scream in pain. You were just awake all along." "Yeah, just now your heart suddenly jumped so fast." "Hee hee." Morong Yan stood up and said maliciously. Bai Feng's face blushed with embarrassment, and from her cheeks to her ears, it turned red due to the surge of blood. "Seeing how light your movements are, I believe your injury has almost healed, right?" "Yes. Yes, what about your injury, Miss Morong?" "Me." Morong Yan opened her sleeve and glanced at her, saying, "I must be getting better faster than you. Also, don't call me Morong Miss in the future, call me Yenner. Do you know? Brother Feng." The girl spoke as she leaned closer to Bai Feng. "Please. Please stop joking, girl." Bai Feng lowered her head and said shyly. Morong Yan put her hands on her waist and asked in confusion, "Who was joking with you? Who was holding someone else for a night's sleep last night? Can it be that you want to turn your back and not admit it?" If Bai Feng offends the girl in any way, she is willing to cut off her arm as a gesture of apology. "Who wants your arm? What a piece of wood, dot." After speaking, Morong Yan angrily walked aside and ignored Bai Feng. Bai Feng had no choice but to quickly find the way to the camp, but was completely unaware of the road conditions. Morong Yan sneered and said, "Do you want to go back and help your friend?" "Sigh, it's a pity I don't know the way." "She must know the way," Bai Feng said to herself. Immediately facing Morong Yan, she said, "Miss Morong, I beg you. Take me to that camp." The girl remained silent in response. Bai Feng continued, "How could I not understand the girl's intentions? If the girl really knows spiritual communication skills, I should know that I only want to find Yi's husband and help my friends now. As for the girl's intentions, I apologize for not being able to respond immediately." "Who wants you to respond? Can't even let me follow you." Morong Yan turned to face Bai Feng and said, Besides, our relationship is different from ordinary people. It's better to call it closer, isn't it?" "Of course." Bai Feng smiled gently and said, "It's a blessing for Bai Feng to be able to make close friends like a girl." "What did you just call me?" Yenner." After hearing this, Morong Yan was overjoyed and took the white bag next to her and set off on the road. Bai Feng saw that this bundle was filled with the smell of herbs, so she asked what it was. "I've run out of herbs in the camp, so I'll pick some back," Morong Yan replied. "So, are you from the camp?" "Yes, they rescued me from the bandits, so I wanted to do some intelligence to answer them. Coincidentally, while picking herbs, I met Brother Feng. Perhaps this is fate." As soon as she finished speaking, Morong Yan took Bai Feng's hand and walked through the intricate forest. Bai Feng allowed her to guide her forward, feeling a wonderful joy in her heart. At the same time, she kept muttering, "Is fate luck?" End of this chapter.